No, he knows it.
Yeah, he will come. Maybe. You know, usually there's people that do stuff.
Yes.
Ich weiß nicht, ob es an der Webseite liegt oder.
Weil eigentlich geht eine andere Website? Achso, dann geht es noch dein Gmail.
Ah ja.
Weil es andere Websites gibt?
Ja, da muss das HTTP davor. Also PS sogar.
Spirit.
Ja.
Du kannst auch mir schicken und ich ziehe es hier rein. Otto, you've got it here. Yeah. Ach so, Herztasche.
I know that now it's also official. It is, I think, you asked the faculty whether they agree with being co-supervised.
Okay.
It's an official.
Yes, I got the email that I had to submit one document to the university, marking you as marking professor and all that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Hier war viele wichtige sein. Auch eins?
Ja, das ist so fertig gemacht und dann hat die Fragen
Ist eine Kamera?
Welche meinst du?
Just einfügen.
Das heißt, für Insellösung?
Ja.
Nur nicht für Insel.
Nee.
No, we're not live anymore.
Ja, dann kann ich vielleicht nur ganz kurz überlegen, was
Man hört es auf jeden Fall. 20 Leute hören das Ganze. Aber Should not sit too close to it when I
Was denn, ich gehe hoch wegen Presseanfragen. Wir schon seit 2 Jahren.
Ja, okay.
Irgendwas anderes ist, du kannst dich nur um Film kümmern. Hab's jetzt?
Ja, alles gut.
Cool. Dann ruft ihr mich.
During the day, not more than -5.
So shipping is stopped or so?
And it's covered with snow, so it's quite empty. Very in the forest, there are no perfect conditions.
Yeah. Are you cross country skier?
Both RP and but now I like more the cross country.
Weil sie had 40 centimeters but I have snow and frost per year. We have a little break. We can then walk through the posters, but we can also chat a bit. I think we should start. We have critical mass.
Die hören auch schon im Livestream.
Bis zu einer halben Stunde für die Präsentation und dann noch so eine Viertelstunde für den Recht. Und dann nach allen Tagen das Zwischenbereich, wo die
Ist okay für mich. Ist okay. Das ist eine.
Well, good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon, everyone. This is our workshop on sustainable access to energy in remote rural areas in developing countries. Energy. We will have a set of very interesting presentations, I believe. Let me just make a couple of introductory remarks. Biomass-based energy still plays a key role for primary energy supply in, for instance, many African countries. 60 to 80% of primary energy results from biomass in countries like Ethiopia or Tanzania. So a priority definitely has to be how to bring efficiency in this traditional sector of energy, which has complex external effects because of smoke in the house and adverse health effects. So it's not just the labor and environmental issues, but the health issues. My second remark relates to what I consider a real disappointment with cooking stoves over the years. You know that I'm close to NGOs, but I think NGOs have really goofed on that one. One untested technology after the other, subsidized distributions, no sustainability, far too little involvement with of local entrepreneurship and coming to scale. This may be a somewhat biased, provocative introduction on that front of cooking stoves, but I hope we get a different perspective and interesting new insights there. The third is I think we need to pay a lot of attention to the game-changing role of solar energy in rural areas, in remote rural areas, not only for community use of energy in decentralized ways, for light and for other use of energy in villages, but also for the application in irrigation. We had last week, Thursday and Friday, the Global Forum on Food and Agriculture in Berlin, in the context also of G20 agriculture meetings. And that set of meetings very much focused on agriculture and water. But what came strongly in from the sidelines was the role of energy and the game-changing role of solar energy changing water management and offering great new opportunities but huge challenges for excessive pumping of groundwater, etc. I don't want to go too much into detail. I make these introductory remarks to underline that energy, just like water, just like land use change, cannot and must not be treated in isolation, but in a nexus context. The energy, land, water nexus issues, at the center of which is the focus on people's well-being. Let me briefly introduce our featured speakers. First will speak Dr. Elisha Mirzabayev, senior researcher from CEF, and he will focus on water, energy, food security nexus of decentralized energy use in China, Ethiopia, and India. Elisha is a senior researcher who got his PhD here from University of Bonn in the field of climate change and food security work. He has become famous for his work on the sustainability of land use and land degradation, the economics of land degradation, and other works. He will be followed by Michael Grimm. Professor Grimm is from University of Passau, where he is the professor of development economics. And Professor Grimm is also a senior fellow of CEF, so welcome, fellow. And he will speak on demand for off-grid solar electricity, experimental evidence from Rwanda. Then we have a little coffee break, and we will walk out there, and there will be some posters. And Varun Gaur is there, and here is Varun, and there's Chen, who will also stand next to her poster, and they would be welcome. They would welcome your visits and your questions on their work in India and China, respectively, on decentralized rural energy. Those are almost completed or practically completed doctoral dissertations, so a lot of substance behind one page on a poster. I'm sure you like talking with them. After the coffee break, we will listen eagerly to Jörg Peters, who is heading the research group Climate Change in Developing Countries. He's also a visiting associate professor at the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. He will speak on short-run subsidies and long-run adoption, experimental evidence on improved cooking stoves. Here we have them. Cooking stoves in Senegal. And so we have some really interesting topics before us. Please see the interconnections. But we want to also immediately ask our presenters questions. They will speak about 20 to 30 minutes. We will protect 10-15 minutes of direct questions and answers. Then we settle them here on a podium and have, in the end, maybe 20 minutes of cross-cutting discussions. You in the audience are as important to us as these featured speakers. Elisha, you have the floor. I ask you to warmly welcome our speakers.
Thank you very much, Professor van Brouw. So my topic is called, I will speak about the water, energy, food security effects of decentralized energy use in 3 developing countries. In my speech I will emphasize more on Ethiopia and only highlight some of the findings we have together with colleagues, primarily through their doctoral work, Varun Gaur and Chen Kisao, on India and China. So I will just whet your appetite for their work, but for detailed view of their work, you can go and see their posters, which will be there outside during the coffee break. So as Professor von Braun already said, nowadays about 1.2 billion people still do not have access to electricity. And almost 3 billion people rely on traditional biomass, that means firewood, crop straw, and animal dung to satisfy all their energy, most of their energy needs. So this lack of access to energy, clean, reliable, affordable, is a major obstacle for development, for sustainable development and poverty reduction. More specifically, the use of this traditional firewood, crop straws, and animal dung as a source of energy for cooking is causing a lot of health problems in many developing countries where it is used predominantly. So according to World Health Organization, up to 4 million people die every year due to pulmonary diseases caused by this indoor air pollution. And it's only the death part. There are also 40 million disability-adjusted life years, so people lose their productive life because of illness and health issues. And what is very concerning, this touches especially women, who are responsible for cooking in most households. But when rural households in developing countries, they make their decisions about energy access or energy production, energy use, they don't do it separately. They do it together with their other decisions on land management, on water use, on agricultural production in an interconnected way, because they have to distribute, allocate their resources to all these activities, labor resources, other land resources. So this may create conditions for trade-offs and maybe perhaps synergies, which also need to be studied together, because if they are not studied together, we will not understand their links, and we will miss on a lot of the story which is happening with energy use and other aspects. So specific research questions that I would like to answer in this presentation are shown here. So what are the specific nexus trade-offs and synergies between energy and food production? And what are the drivers and impacts of improved access to decentralized energy using these 3 case study countries, with more emphasis on Ethiopia. So in all these case study countries, the approach to analysis and work was organized in a consistent manner, so that we can compare and try to generalize from these case studies. So in Ethiopia, as we all know, there is still strong dependence on agriculture with low input use, and biomass provides about 90% of all energy needs in the country. And there is also, Ethiopia has one of the highest rates of land degradation. Every year about 4.5 billion equivalent of $4.5 billion are lost in Ethiopia due to land degradation. So the government has very far-reaching, ambitious plans for increasing crop productivity through expanding irrigated areas and using more fertilizers. And of course, all these aspects will have very important impact on poverty reduction, on rural livelihoods and incomes. So this figure shows the causal links that we're studying to look in Ethiopia regarding different aspects of nexus trade-offs and synergies. So on the left-hand side, we start with resources. So family households have their labor and other resources like land and production inputs. And for example, if you take labor, they can allocate their labor either to food production, to energy production and collection, or non-farm employment. Here by energy production we mean specifically cultivation of trees. And collection is not on-farm cultivation, but collection, food collection. So there are some other elements which they can or cannot, may not do. Applying sustainable land management practices. So the idea is whether or not to see if sustainable land management can create synergies across all these food and energy production. And what is importantly, the impact on gender aspects are also need to be studied because, as I said, one of the biggest sufferers of this traditional food use are women. And also, ultimately, we want to have an idea of their impact on food security and energy security. So, for that, we used the Rural Household Survey conducted by International Food Policy Research Institute in 2012. So, it was conducted in the Nile River Basin of Ethiopia, covering the provinces listed here, Tigray, Amhara, Oromia, SNMP, and Benishangul Gumuz, about 900 households, sample size. So the questionnaire contained very detailed information about agricultural and energy production, collection, non-farm work, use of sustainable land management practices, and others, demographics, asset ownership. So if you look at some of the data, descriptive data, which shows the characteristics of households. In total, households allocate about 143 days of labor, male equivalent labor, to crop production, and about 20-25% of that, so 4 times less of that for growing trees. We can see input use relatively low, but these figures are also influenced by some farmers which apply intensively, and there are also a lot of farmers share of farmers households which do not apply intensively or not at all. So total farm size about 2 hectares. So mostly rain-fed. So only about 6% of households have irrigation pump and do some irrigated agricultural production. So mostly rain-fed area. But what is encouraging, the application rates for SLM practices and maybe technologies too, practices and technologies. Here, for example, what I mean is, for example, manure application, or if we go a little bit more complicated, SLM is terracing, mulching, conservation agriculture practices. Access extension seems to be very well covered. 92% of households had access to extension. Distance to markets and other demographic characteristics. So the figure I'm looking is access to electricity, which is about 17%. So 17% of households have some access to electricity. It doesn't mean that they have 24-hour access to electricity. It means that they have some access to electricity. Maybe there are interruptions, but they can from time to time access electricity. Another graph which I think important to see is the time households spend collecting firewood. So this is minutes per week. So as you can see from this graph, from this table as well, women are the main laborers who spend their time on collecting firewood. So it varies by region, but as we can see, quite often women spend 2 times or even 4 times, 5 times more time than men, for example, on collecting firewood. Of course, there are some other regions where it is also seems more equally distributed, like the last row, SNMP, Southern National. So I will just briefly show the model specification. The dependent variable we have is value of crop production during the last season in local currency, birr. So whenever I say birr, if you want to have a reference, if you divide by 20, it will be equivalent to US dollars. So, and then we have explanatory variables which correspond to those which are shown in the conceptual figure. Labor, allocation to different activities, land, institutional factors like market access, land tenure security, land tenure, access to extension, tree cultivation, inputs used, and also household characteristics together with application of sustainable land management practices. So if we come to the results, I highlight some of the results which I found interesting, but there are so what it shows that, for example, if you take the first row, total labor days applied on crops, we can see that it's positive, and you have some statistical significance which is shown by stars. So the more stars you have, it's more statistically important. So amount of labor households applied to crop production is positively associated with the value of crops. So the more you work, the more labor you apply, the more crops you produce. That sounds very logical. But what we can see here is that the elasticity of labor is relatively small. So if I interpret that coefficient, every 1% increase in labor allocation to crop production will increase crop production by 0.1%. So 1% and 0.1%. So it means that the marginal product of additional labor applied to food production is relatively low. Perhaps there is already, the production is very labor intensive. On the contrary, if we look at the inputs, which are also quite significant, there we have a much bigger impact. So 100 kilogram of fertilizer application per hectare increases crop production by 21%. Okay. So coefficient means that every SLM practice applied, like manure application or terracing, so each of them increases crop production by 3%. Those households who apply irrigation, so own pump and apply irrigation, they also have about 90% higher, on average, values of crop production. So non-farm work seems to have negative association. So those households who are more engaged in non-farm activities, they consequently allocate less of their time to home production of crops. That's why their own production is lower than those who entirely allocate their labor for home crop production. But two coefficients I would like to especially point to your attention is the number of trees. So tree cultivation, which has a positive sign and seems to be statistically significant, and also female time spent by female adults on collecting firewood. The first one, cultivation of trees in your own plot, has a positive relationship with food production. But the other one, female adults spending time collecting firewood, has a negative one. So how can we understand this? So when female adults spend more of their time collecting firewood, and the firewood is increasingly getting more scarce, they cannot allocate their time for on-farm crop production. They need to divert their time to something else. So that's why that has negative implication. But when households grow trees on their own plots nearby their houses, they can economize on that time. So they can, instead of spending a lot of time on walking around and walking long distances to collect firewood, they can use their own tree production, trees or twigs collected from those trees at home to cover some of their energy needs. That's why it saves their labor time. It may also have other beneficial impacts like bio-drainage or other things in different contexts. But labor channel, one of the papers recently published in Agricultural Economics also points at this channel when tree cultivation through saving of labor time dedicated to firewood collection allows to increase food production. So some other findings that the important role of livestock. Livestock seems to be those households who own livestock. And they have higher crop production because livestock is often used as a very flexible working capital, and also as a saving mechanism to smoothen consumption shocks. But what is a little bit worrying, the negative sign of household head gender. So those households headed by females seem to have lower values of crop production according to this data. You can see some of the statistics of the, if you are interested, of the regression. So if I summarize a little bit this part, so results point, well, if not synergies, but at least there seem no trade-offs between food and energy production when it concerns tree cultivation. Yeah? So tree cultivation at own plot seems to have some kind of positive relationship with crop production. But the trade-off is through female labor allocation to firewood collection, which then competes with female labor use in food production, in crop production. Participation in non-farm work is also associated with lower own food production. So we will come to this non-farm work more later on in my presentation. It seems to be a very important determinant of livelihood, of incomes and livelihoods, and even of energy decisions of households. So other major factors positively influencing crop production are sustainable land management, better market access, livestock ownership. So if I now give similar analysis was conducted in China by Chen, and she will talk about it during her poster session. So, and very, in my opinion, very interesting results are that the links between different aspects of household production activities. Higher agricultural input prices were found to increase production costs and thus reduce the income, disposable income households have, and this is leading to lower purchases of commercial energy from outside and leading to higher family labor allocation to biomass energy collection. So agricultural inputs like fertilizer prices or other prices, if they're higher, if they go higher, through some links, feedback loops, it's influencing household time allocation for biomass collection. Other important finding is that once there are a lot of non-farm opportunities, employment opportunities, that puts a lot of pressure on wages. Wages start increasing, and the opportunity cost of labor also increases. As a result, collection of biomass, energy, fuel wood, starts declining because people have more productive, more remunerative ways of spending their time. And they can, instead of collecting themselves, spend their time on non-farm activities, earn more, and just buy that energy from external market. So returning to Ethiopia, the statistics also shows that nowadays households, this table shows the major sources of cooking energy. So as you can see, the major source own woodlots. So many households are doing what we were talking about in the regression. So they are getting about 40%, 42% of their energy from their own woodlot. And of course there are other, but altogether if you look, the traditional sources of energy represent about 99% of all energy needs. So this biogas and solar panel, just 1%. Even that, so it's, that means that there are all those health issues that we talked about are very much, very big concern, and moreover, all the 17% of households that we talked about had access to electricity. Some access. So the question we posed is that well, on the one hand, number of households who applied this biogas or solar panel is very low. So we cannot do, for example, econometric study. We cannot do run regression statistics and then say find what are the drivers of adoption, because quantitatively, because the observations are so few. So what we did together with a colleague, Utkur Janibekov, is to work on the agricultural household model, which is dynamic, 10 years, and which tries to evaluate policies which may facilitate adoption of improved decentralized energy options, and also look at some of their impacts. So the energies which were considered in the model, the energy sources, were biogas, solar panels, electric batteries linked to solar panels because of the different timing, so that households could also have electricity at night, LPG, liquefied petroleum gas, diesel-based electric generators, and others. But also, of course, we consider traditional options which are now being used: fuel wood, manure, crop straws, and also kerosene for lighting. But we, in our modeling, we were also interested to see at the heterogeneous effects across different categories of households. So we clustered households into two categories based on these variables that we have here. So the major difference between these categories is non-farm income. As you can see, category 1 has only 88, so $4, about $4 of non-farm income. So very low on average here, on average. And the category 2 has much more, significantly more. So, but these are only very few people, 80, so 10% of the sample. So it's the rural typology of households seems there's a very small number of households who who are employed on farm, but also have also their own farm as well. And they derive important part, bigger share of their income from non-farm activities. And the other, the remaining part derives mostly income from agriculture. The difference in other parameters is relatively small. So here you can see this difference. So second household, second category allocates about both females and males. Females even more. So these are teachers, nurses, government workers, 200 days per year for non-farm work, while the first category, on average, about 68-62%. But what is more, perhaps even more important, is the wage rates. So the category 2 has higher wage, so they are working in better paid jobs, even in non-farm. And category 1 has lower wage, and that's also translated in their lower income. So 2 scenarios were considered. First is subsidizing the adoption of improved energy options for 10% subsidy for biogas and 70% subsidy for solar system. So these levels were chosen in a way that at this level subsidies have impact on adoption. Start having some impact on adoption. And then also, since non-farm employment is very important, seems very important, so we had a scenario, what if there would be more non-farm opportunities for everybody, so that everybody will have equal non-farm employment. Of course, it may be a little bit simplistic, but we wanted to see this effect on the labor market. So what we can see is that the subsidies have big impact on energy mix of richer households. Non-farm, those who derive most of their income from non-farm activities most. But they have basically very little impact. So you have a little bit of solar appearing, but that's very small. But so otherwise, it seems there is not much impact of these subsidies on the poorer category of households, those rural agricultural households. So big change on the subsidy scenario was the expansion of biogas used by the second category of households. So if you look at the incomes, change in the incomes, subsidies did not really make big changes. Subsidizing energy did not change overall income. Well, one of the reasons my colleagues and I discussed was this may be due to the lack of appliances which can use this. So there was not much impact on incomes, but there was a big impact on income of the poor category when there were more non-farm employment opportunities. So similarly, if I give a little bit of preview of India case, the same kind of approach, but here we have household categories a little bit different. So category 2 here is rich again, but they are rich because they are big landowners. They have big land, big farms. And category 1, they are mostly laborers with very small owned land plots. So that's the major difference in India, Uttar Pradesh case. As you can see, in this case, the scenarios were subsidizing solar panels. It had a big impact again on the rich category of households. So their use of solar energy has increased, both solar energy for operating the pump and for lighting. And then household category 1, their energy mix changed. They started using more fuel wood. So they were using, so green is sugarcane leaves that were used as the major source of cooking of energy before. The subsidizing created links which led them to use more fuel wood than before. Yeah? This black area. And also they started buying electricity from solar panels generated by the second household. Before they were buying from irrigation from rich households, but generated differently. But again, if you look at the income effects,
Alisha,
yeah?
would you mind to go
Yes,
one
please.
step back and tell us a bit more about they seem to have very different structure of energy use, these households 1 and 2.
Yes.
One lives off sugarcane leaves, is that so?
Yes. Yes. Green one, sugarcane leaves.
How can you compare them if they have such a different energy base? Are these different locations or?
No, they are from the same Uttar Pradesh. So these are different categories of households, and the idea was to look at the impact of subsidies on energy, on the energy users, but also on labor market labor allocations.
Okay.
So this subsidies have also created labor allocations when household category 1 started working even less in their own farms and started working more in the farms as hired labor in the farms of the second category, while the second category started working less in their own farms and started spending more time on non-farm income, non-farm jobs. So the idea to link these two types of households were because there are linkages between them in terms of contractual labor and also in terms of providing to each other irrigation services. Basically, a rich household provides irrigation services to the poor households because they have the solar panel and the panel, or before that they adopting for it, they had a diesel operated. So that's why
Okay, thank you. I simply didn't see any difference between business as usual and EQL.
Yes.
The subsidy makes a difference, brings in solar in
Yes.
household 2.
But providing more non-farm opportunities does not seem to change
Okay.
energy mix.
Yeah.
So similarly for incomes, relatively minor changes, but again, non-farm jobs seem to create a very more opportunities for income increases for poorer households. So if I summarize a little bit, maybe some implications, tentative, based on this research. So this modeling results show that subsidies can accelerate energy transition to more efficient and cleaner sources, but to a large extent it will be it seems to happen first, at least among the richer households. Energy subsidies and energy transition had relatively minor income effects, but what we found that access to non-farm jobs seems to have a substantial poverty reduction impact in both India and Ethiopia. So at the end, I would like just to say that all this research was financially supported by German Ministry of Economic Development and Cooperation, and we are very thankful for that.
Stay here for a moment, and it's really interesting that not only food, energy, and land are connected, but you had to bring in the labor markets and the opportunity cost of time to understand the economic change of changing energy sources. Your questions, please. Your questions, please.
Can you say a bit more about the subsidy? So I didn't really get, who paid the subsidy, how large was that subsidy, under what condition was it paid?
Yes. So the subsidies were paid by government, and in Ethiopia case that was 10% subsidy of the initial cost of biogas installation. Yeah. and 50% of solar panel costs. In the case of Ethiopia. In the case of India, it was a little bit different. It was solar panels for pumping and solar panels for lighting, taken separately. And there it was 50% for solar panels for irrigation and 70% for lighting. So almost more than half of the upfront costs.
And you said that, say, the number of households that are using these sources are still relatively low. So then you said that you use simulation methods to get the impact.
Yes. So what we did, we simulated the impact at what level household can afford or can have enough funds to purchase.
So you assume that households will adopt as soon as they can afford it?
Well, that was the simplistic idea behind this model.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a bit surprised that a 10% subsidy for biogas leads to any adoption at all, because biogas digesters are very expensive. They come at like $600-700 per household. So, you know, 10% would be like $70, let's say $60-70, and then you still have to pay $500-600, something like that. So my prior would be that this doesn't really trigger any adoption.
Yeah, I think the reason why it led to adoption here that well, this is optimization model, so households also have their own savings.
Okay.
So in order to optimize their incomes, it also allowed them to use their savings.
Okay.
Was this more than one household maybe? Or because it's groups of households which take a biogas digester, then the capital constraint may not be so severe. But I don't know. Okay, 2 more, 3 more. We take them all, you take notes, please.
Thank you very much for the interesting presentation. In the beginning you started with biomass. How did you, what is the definition of biomass in your research? Is it just wood production or is it from agricultural residues as well? As you mentioned later on, it was a source from 2013. So I'm not quite sure in which context you use biomass.
Yeah.
And allow me a second question. On slide 16, you used cooking energy also used with solar panels. And this is really astonishing. Isn't it the use of household energy? I mean, how can they cook on electricity made from solar panels? We are still sticking on this issue, and as far as I know, it's not possible yet. So isn't here the meaning of solar cookers, or is it really that they cook with energy making from solar panels?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is one person.
Yeah,
So this is one person. So, well, for technologically, I think nowadays it's possible to use solar energy for cooking.
It's not, or is it is, but you use a lot of panels, so this must be very expensive.
Yeah, but here maybe that was in the survey data. Yeah, maybe I need to check that, but that's what was in the survey data I used.
Okay.
Thanks. So my question actually also relates to the same slide. Actually, I thought it was very interesting that so much of their energy comes from their own land, and I was wondering whether in the course of the research you found there were some specific policies that encouraged that, or was it simply a question of that other supplies were scarce and not worth searching for? To me, this indicates perhaps it's interesting to see the biogas is a very small share, and to see that a lot of wood and dominant residues are produced. So does that mean that some other kind of cook stove, other than a biogas cook stove, such as an efficient wood burning cook stove or something else, would be advised?
Well, I don't know about if you, how we can advise others. Probably, I don't know. I have not looked into that issue. Most of the own woodlot energy from own production comes, well, there may be some policies, but what our analysis showed that this makes economic sense even without additional government policies. But I know that Ethiopia has a lot of reforestation policies to support, especially in degraded lands, to support tree.
So especially interested whether those policies might include encouraging agroforestry in the sense of nitrogen fixing wood crops.
Yeah.
Das war 10 also. Oliver?
Right. In the last 1 year, there has been a very significant project or program called the Last Mile Electricity and Connectivity Program by the US government, supporting a number of countries in Sub-Saharan African region, giving electricity to the rural areas, which has been really massive in terms of connectivity to the grid and on the grid and all this. I don't know how much that would change most of your analysis, given that it's sort of a subsidy as well. I mean, it's a program that is providing electricity all over the rural areas in a number of countries, and Ethiopia is one of these countries. Maybe it would be worth considering also how this will change the dynamic as well. But the other second component is that in your results in slide number 10, there seem to be a very drastic change when it comes to the children here. I think it's about 8 in terms of time collecting firewood, but then the women shift really about 238 and men very low. Do you have any quick comments on that? It seems the children are really less used here.
If you compare with others, the change is relatively small, so minutes per week, so 8 minutes per week or 10 minutes per week, it doesn't make a big change here, but well.
And are lazy.
No, I think it's just
they go to school.
It depends a lot, perhaps, on different aspects, not only labor opportunities, forest or availability of forest, local characteristics, so a lot of things. Regarding your question on electricity, so the idea is not that there is a contradiction between centralized grids or decentralized options. Of course, we need both of these options, but some areas, remote areas, it may make more economic sense, at least to start with decentralized energy options, because centralized grid may be just simply not economical enough to bring to those areas.
Okay, I found it particularly interesting, Alicia, Miklos, you said that you hinted at the insights from the China work, which showed that lack of economic development drives people into traditional bioenergy, but off-farm work and growing income drives them into use of electricity. So it seems to be that development is good for more sustainable energy uses if that electricity comes from sustainable sources. For those basic relationships, I think we need to study. The use of electricity, obviously, and the use of biomass-based energy is endogenous. And so we have to work on the employment and income developments and not just try to fix energy independent of that. We will come back to your discussions. Now I would like to ask Michael to step up and talk about demand for off-grid solar electricity, the Rwanda experiments. We look forward to your presentation. Colleagues, feel free to ask a little question in between if you don't understand something or need a
no problem.
to protect your time.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be here and to speak about solar energy, and that links very well to the previous presentation. We go maybe a step backward because you analyzed already subsidies. So the question we have here is, what is the demand for solar energy by households and what is their willingness to pay. And given this willingness to pay, does it make sense, or do we have an argument then for subsidies? And this is joint work with Luciane Lenz, who's also in the room. She's sitting over there. Then Jörg Peters, who will also present the next paper, and then Maximiliane Siebert. She should be on the other side of the screen, so she will follow us through the live streaming of this presentation. And I would also like to thank CEF and also the BMSEC for financial support for this research. Good. So we heard already that, well, we have this huge problem ahead of us. 1.1 billion people lack access to electricity, and this is particularly severe in Africa, in rural Africa, where only 13% have any access to electrification. And so the United Nations and others are thinking about interventions to do something about this. And there's this well-known Sustainable Energy for All initiative, where the target has been formulated to connect by 2030 every household to electricity. So the question is a bit, well, why do we want to do this and what will it cost? Well, the impact expectations are, of course, on income, so we assume that by providing electricity to households, not only household productivity will go up, but also that this electricity will be used in productive activities, farm and non-farm. We have heard a bit about education, and we have in particular heard already about the health effects. All this will be very costly, so well, of course, estimating the exact cost is quite complicated, but some talk about a sum of almost $400 billion for Africa alone. So that would mean annual investment costs of 90 million, and if you compare this to official development assistance of 42 billion, then you can see that this is really a major task. So we should look very carefully at what can be efficient and effective and what is maybe not really a promising strategy to work on this. If you look at the impacts of electrification, and here I draw a bit on the literature, then you see there's quite some promising evidence indeed for Asia and Latin America, where you see that electrification has brought huge benefits to households and also had really economic impacts. So that means on the setup of firms and some manufacturing and so on. If you look at Africa, first of all, the evidence is much thinner. There are not so many studies. Of course, there are also not so many projects that you could analyze, because this is a more recent development here compared to other areas. There's some evidence on South Africa, where they focus in particular at labor market participation, find some significant effects, in particular for women. And then there's some work on a few other African countries, in particular on Rwanda, that is done by my colleague Jörg. They looked at the electrification rollout program in Rwanda. It's a program that has acted very fast. You see here in the first phase, the electrification rate could be brought from 6 to 17% within a very short period of time. And so far this is all on-grid electrification, and the uptake has been quite substantial, so people connect to the grid. So some impact here at the extensive margin, but if you look then at the intensive margin, so what are people doing with the electricity, then this is a bit less promising. I mean, you see that of course people start to light their houses, and they start to have small electric appliances, but there's so far only little impact on, say, firm creation and in particular impacts in the manufacturing sector. So little impact on, say, the emergence and the growth of, say, medium and larger firms. So here you see this just represented through a graph. I mean, that people tend to use very little energy, in fact. Okay, and well, given these impacts, there's also not so much impact on poverty, right? So it's not that what has been taking place so far would have reduced or would have made an important contribution to poverty reduction. Good. Well, so if this means that for the moment, certainly not in the longer term, but maybe in the medium term, say, smaller capacities could also do to have the kind of impacts that we have seen for the rollout of the electricity grid, then maybe it's worth to look at solar energy and to see what solar home systems or even smaller solar devices can bring as benefits to households. And you see a few examples, references, where we and others have worked on this in Burkina Faso, Senegal, Rwanda, so where the effects of this are a bit documented. And let me refer to a study that is a bit the predecessor to the study that I will talk about later on. So an experiment that we have conducted a couple of years ago in Rwanda, where we distributed for free small solar lamps to see what is the impact of that, to what extent does it help poor rural households. So this happened in very remote areas, where of course no grid electricity is available and where demand for electricity is relatively low. So what we could find here is that energy expenditures went down by 40%, and we could calculate also the annual return on the investment. So if these households had bought the land, what would be the return of this? So just taking into account these direct benefits on energy expenditures, and this is about 20%. That's it, not enormous, but it's quite significant. Then, of course, we also looked at other effects where maybe say it's more difficult now to put this in numbers, so it's more qualitative evidence. What this could mean for households. So we found, for instance, that children reallocate their time for studying, they study more in the evening, and for boys we could also show that they study more, so there could also be then some impact on educational achievement. We could show that households reduce their kerosene consumption and the consumption of candles. So again, here we have the likely health effects that should follow from that. And of course, you can also think of some environmental effects, because a lot of this budget effect has to do with the substitution of batteries through this solar device. So we could also expect that less battery waste is created by providing this source. Okay, so the conclusion of this was that, well, this can be a useful bridging technology. So it could help us to achieve this objective to connect everyone to some source of electricity by 2030, and that would be probably in many remote areas much more effective and efficient than trying to connect these households to the grid electricity, if at all that was possible. But still we found that in this study that probably still for many households these kind of lamps are too expensive, right? So also, well, in absolute terms, these are investments that are relatively light, but still compared to the budgets these households have, it might be difficult to trust that just the market will bring these lamps to the households. Okay, so therefore we asked them the question, okay, now given these benefits and given these doubts that we have that the market can really reach these households, let's really test what is the willingness to pay of these households, and then on conditional on what we will find, just also to speculate a bit about the role of subsidies and how large these subsidies would have to be to have an impact or to reach full coverage. Okay, so just skip this one. The literature is emerging on this. There are three interrelated questions. Yeah, again, I mean, what is cost-effective way of rural electrification? Yeah? Can these solar lamps fill a gap here? Can the poor afford these cost-covering prices? Yeah? Can they pay the market prices for this? And this is, I mean, here relevant for the solar lamps, but if you look at the literature, you find this discussion for many other devices, also in the health domain. And what is the effect of liquidity constraints? So we'll see that in our experiment we built something in also to test whether, just relaxing a little bit this liquidity constraint by giving households a credit, whether this could increase uptake. Okay, so here you have the setting. So we went to 16 off-grid villages, so villages not connected to the electricity grid. They were distributed over 11 sectors in different parts of the country. I'll show you in a minute a map. and we selected randomly 324 households. And these households do not know much about these solar lamps, so it's a technology that is new to them. And we so wanted to measure this willingness to pay, and we thought, well, just asking them now what they would pay, that is probably not good enough really to reveal what they would pay or could pay if they were really confronted to the situation where they had to make a purchase decision. So we sort of implementing a so-called Becker-de-Groot-Marschak bidding game. So that means that we really came with solar lamps to these households, offered these lamps, and we told them just what the price range is. So we gave a minimum and a maximum, relatively large range in between, and said, well, tell us the price that you would buy for this lamp. And in fact, we showed them 3 different ones, one after the other. So just asking the willingness to pay for the first, and then once this was settled, then one lamp that was a little bit bigger and so on. And then later, on the level of the village, we drew randomly a price. They were informed about this. We said, well, if the price that you reported is equal or above the price we drew, then you will you can purchase the lamp for that price. Okay. So this gives an incentive to the households first to think really well about their budget constraint, but also about their preferences. So to see, okay, now an incentive to reveal the true willingness to pay for this. Yeah? If you just report it without any consequence, of course, you always run into the risk that households will report higher prices than what they actually could pay. Right? Well, in addition, as I said, so we also worked on this question of the liquidity constraint. So we allocated these households also through 3 different groups randomly, and depending on the group they had to pay this lamp within the first 7 days, or within 6 weeks, or within 5 months. And of course the hypothesis was, so if liquidity constraints are binding, then maybe the uptake and therefore the willingness to pay is higher if households have more time to repay this lamp.
Excuse me?
Yes.
And were there households who changed their mind afterwards, who refused to buy?
Well, so in principle, of course, they were told that, you know, once the decision was made, then this is binding. But now households that got a credit, for instance, so 6 weeks or this 5 months, they got the lamp immediately, right? And then they had to pay. And this was possible through mobile banking. So we have a whole section in the paper. I won't really talk about this today, but if you're interested, you can read about this. So it was quite a challenge, of course, to get the money back. Yeah, we got in the end about almost 70%, and so that's also something that we discuss. So we say, okay, if you think that these sort of repayment schemes could be promising, of course you also have to think about the exact implementation. So how could you really make sure that the repayment is high enough? So we say for the first, we didn't bother households too much, so we just waited whether they stick to their commitment, and once the repayment period was over, then we started to call them, then later also to visit the houses and saying that, well, of course we have to take the lamp back if you do not pay. So that was effective. I mean, repayment rates increased quite a lot, but as I said, we could not get 100% at the end. So that's another practical problem, right, that you face if you think about these kind of repayment mechanisms. One has also to say that we did this, of course, in a quite informal way. So if you would do this in cooperation with a microfinance institution, I guess that you would probably have better means to increase this repayment rate further.
So I noticed that your rate of return was about 20%, so that it would occur to me that, well, then it repays itself in about 5 years, and so I was a bit curious as to why you would not try to experiment with a 5-year repayment period, which would almost guarantee a universal acceptance, since they would at least be even.
Well, first, I don't think that households would make really this, they do not know about this 20% return. Also, we explained them a bit what this lamp can, but the objective was not now to influence them in one or the other direction. But you know, this, I mean, this is what we see all the time. I mean, there are many investments around there that have potentially very high returns. I mean, take fertilizer, and still the uptake of fertilizer is so low, so you could repay it exactly with the next harvest. So, you know, this, I mean, rationally you are right, but this is not typically what you observe, right? And the thing is also that you would not be able to use the lamp over 5 years, right? So the life expectancy of a lamp like this is about 2 years, right? 2.5 years. Yeah. Okay, so let me go on. Good, so here just on this, in this table you see the 3 lamps. So a small one, a medium-sized one, a bigger one. So they of course differ in their performance and in their capacity to produce lumen. And you see the prices, which goes from $14 to $189. Yeah, this is in official exchange rate, so it's not in PPP. So you have to think that, well, for the households there, this is a bit more expensive than it appears here through the use of the exchange rates. Good, so this is a map where you see where these villages are, so it's distributed. Again, we selected on purpose remote areas. And here you see just a flowchart that shows you the game. So it started you know, with a small lamp, and then the second lamp, third lamp. Every time it was a short presentation of the device, and households were allocated into these 3 groups, so the 1 week, 6 week, and the 5 months repayment period. And households, of course, they could say, decide whether they want to participate at all, and if they participated for the small lamp, then they were asked, okay, now do you want to bid also for the second one? If they said no, then of course no one was obliged to participate. And indeed for the third one, given the price, they knew about the minimum price, many immediately said, well, I will not bid for this one because I would never be able to pay for this. Good. Then here you see the main outcomes of this. You see in the very first row the share of households participating, so again quite high for kit 1 and kit 2. Then you see the amount that was given, so it's about $5 for the first one, 16 the second one, and 97 for the third one. And you can compare this to the market price, so it's 13 in the first one, 36 in the second, and 180 in the third, so this is well below the market price. Still, if you look now at the share of total monthly expenditures, so you know they are big compared to what they spend every month, not just on energy, on everything. You see that this is 20% for kit 1, 62% for kit 2, and more than 300% for kit 3. So these are huge amounts of money for these people. You see here the prices that we drew. So we drew prices already that were a bit below market price. So 7.5 on average in kit 1, 23 on kit 2, and 155 for kit 3. Now the nice thing is, if you do such a bidding game, that you can, with these results, really construct demand curves, right? You do not only have this binary outcome, did buy or not. You can, if you put all the observations together, you can produce these nice curves. So you see exactly what is the uptake for a given price for these 3 devices. You see in gray these horizontal lines. These are the price ranges that we gave. If you look at the right-hand side, you see what the willingness to pay covers in terms of the market price. So this is for kit 1, for instance, between 35 and 40%. And you see also below that the subsidy that you would have to pay you know, to reach full uptake of that kit, and that would be on average about $9 per person, and of course much more if you look at device 2 and 3. Yeah? So there's quite some demand for these devices, but in terms of level we see that we are still well below what these households would have to pay on the market. Good. Now, looking at the randomized payment schemes, so you see that for the 3 kits, and you see for each kit you see 3 regressions, and they differ in terms of what is controlled for. So say the most conservative one is the one that you see in each block on the right-hand side. So this one here, where we control for quite a number of potential confounders. And you see then the impact of the 6 weeks and the 5 months payment scheme compared to the benchmark, which is just having to pay within the first 7 days. And for Kit 1, one can see that, well, giving a credit over 6 weeks has no significant impact here. Allowing them to repay over 5 months increases this willingness to pay by about 11%. Yeah, so you increase the uptake of these lamps if you allow households to repay over 5 months. That is quite significant, but, well, in the same time, it's also not enormous in terms of change in uptake that you reach here. Then if you look at Kit number 2, also these coefficients, they're all positive, and so that would mean, well, there's some impact here on uptake, but it's not large enough that this shows up as significant. It has, of course, a little bit to do with the sample size as well, so the power is a bit low here, and with a larger sample, maybe it would be significant, but still, I mean, if you look at the order of magnitude, this is around 7%. Though that is again not a major impact here on the uptake of these lamps. And for Kit number 3, we see in the first column that there's impact of 8% increase if you give them 5 months repayment period. Now this effect becomes a bit smaller if we control, in this case, also for the baseline lighting consumption. Yeah, so some effects here on uptake by having a more flexible repayment scheme, but not really a solution to bring this uptake up by a lot. Good. Very briefly, in the survey that we conducted, or the 2 surveys, the baseline and the follow-up survey, we also looked at other things that, well, are not randomized. So this is more descriptive here. We looked at the role of the experience, information, and trust. So experience with, say, different energy and also solar devices, whether they trust, institutions and so on, whether this has some effect on, whether they take up these technologies. And we didn't find huge effects for this experience and information block. We did also not find huge impacts for the discount rate, so how households perceive or account for benefits that occur in the future. So those who do not value this a lot in the future would not now have lower take-up rates than those who have, say, a longer horizon when it comes to their expenditures. The only thing that came out quite significantly, and this is quite interesting, that risk-taking behavior or risk aversion has quite an impact. So those households that declare themselves not being too risk-averse, with risk-loving, are more likely to take up this technology, which also shows that, well, maybe also households are also worried a bit about the, say, utility of this kind of device for their daily life. Good, so let me summarize. First, I think from the results we can certainly conclude that this experiment worked. I mean, people understood the game and participated in a way that indeed we could derive these demand curves. We saw that the willingness to pay increased with the service level, so the more performant the device we offer, the higher the willingness to pay. We also found that we can increase willingness to pay to some extent with these more flexible repayment schemes, but no massive impact. And of course, maybe the key finding here, that this willingness to pay is well below the market price. So this raises doubts of whether just letting private companies setting up markets, or even supported maybe with say donor money, like the Lighting Africa program of the World Bank or so, that this is probably not enough. I mean, they would reach certain social classes, but if you think of the poor and the very poor, probably this would not be enough. So the question is, well, can we work with subsidies? Is that something that could bring up the uptake? So looking at these numbers, yes, we would say, but these subsidies would have to be quite significant. Of course, one could also dig a bit deeper with respect to these repayment schemes. Maybe these repayment periods have to be even longer. There are also some programs now that experiment with so-called pay-as-you-go systems, so where you can transfer money whenever you have some, right? But there's no, say, fixed repayment pattern that you have to adhere to. Okay? So, well, that's a bit what we found here, what we concluded, and I think there's no further slide indeed. So, thanks for your attention.
So the risk averse have higher willingness to pay,
Yes.
which is very much in line with one observes in urban slums. To deal with crime, one of the most desired investment is have all night light around the hut, because there's a huge risk of being attacked and crime. Maybe that rural crime side we should study more. Your questions? 1, 2, 3.
Thanks a lot for your presentation. I was just wondering why the experiment is using solar energy products at a time when the country has a grid expansion program for rural areas. Wouldn't it be a more or less like a conflict of purchase interest when rural areas know they are going to get free government expansion energy programs coming in rural areas, and then they don't have to invest $200 in a solar energy product?
Yeah. Okay. Let's collect the three. Next.
Yeah, thank you for a good presentation. And my question is rather more general on your experiences, especially in these rural areas. What are the demands, if you say, for improved light or improved or sustainable energy for lighting versus that for really cooking in these rural areas? Is lighting really a priority? Is this what people would want, or they would want rather a more sustainable and affordable energy for cooking in the rural areas?
Yeah. Or maybe light over cooking, so that you don't cook in the dark.
So this is basically a follow-up, and also in light of what you said in your final comments, perhaps you'd like to soften your policy implication about the vast majority of the rural poor. It seems like if you were to say that the vast majority of the middle class cannot afford a home because they can't afford a 6-year mortgage, that would be similar. So as I understood it, the device lasts 2 years and repays itself plus a 40% bonus within the 2 years. So perhaps seriously, a 2-year repayment scheme is something that could be managed by the market.
Mm-hmm. Okay. One more.
On one side, you have found willingness to pay increases with payment time. On the other side, you say discount rates do not have any effect on adoption. I see payment time and discount rate are connected. There's some contradiction there, or?
Okay. Questions?
Okay, so the first one, so why do we look at solar lamps at all, given that the country is electrified? I mean, indeed, it's a bit surprising how fast they are going forward, but still, I guess, the last mile, so to say, that will be difficult. There will certainly be areas where this won't be electrified in the near future, simply because first it's very difficult to go there, and the demand is indeed very low. And our argument would also be it's probably not even necessary to go there in the near future, maybe, in 15 or 20 years, yes. But so far, given the demand that people have, and given what I showed you before, what the benefits, of those, including Rwanda, by the way, we looked at the impact of electrification, given how small the effects are on the productive side, it's perfectly fine for the moment to work with off-grid technologies, right? I mean, the solar lamps are of course only a start, but if you bring it later to a solar home system, then you can already have, say, a television, depending on the size, even a fridge. So they are, with the demand, say, far from needing grid electricity, and given all the other priorities the country has, we would say, well, for the moment, you may well electrify the urban and semi-urban areas and then say the fast-growing rural areas, but these very remote pockets that you have throughout the country, that's probably not not immediately necessary now to go there with the grid. And we also think that we won't see any grid there in the near future, but well, maybe we are wrong. Right? And the other thing is, of course, that so even if now Rwanda, because it's also a small country, it goes faster than elsewhere, we have lots of other countries where we have exactly the same problem. And if at the end it turns out, because Rwanda is more dynamic than others, it's not anymore so relevant here, I'm sure it will be relevant in many other countries. Good. The second one, light versus cooking. Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, we didn't investigate this now in detail, this trade-off between the two. But still, I would say that first, from the questions we ask, we know that the preference for light, is quite high, right? So, and you see that people spend a lot on traditional lighting sources, whether it's kerosene, candles, or batteries. So there's definitely something to substitute. And with the cooking energy here, say as long as households collect the wood. That is, of course, we have seen the time burden is quite enormous, but as long as the opportunity cost of time is relatively low, I don't think that households necessarily see this as such an important constraint. It's more that, well, when you start to inform them also about the health consequences and so on, that this really becomes interesting, but this awareness is not yet there. So I think, say, if you really could experiment on this and then ask them for the trade-off, so would you spend a bit more on, clean cooking energy or on having light? I guess that light would definitely be very important in their eyes. With the 2-year repayment period, yes, I agree that, now having the results, it would be interesting to see whether the uptake could be further increased if we had a longer repayment period. We still would, of course, have to work on also a good mechanism to make sure that, well, we get most of it, right? Yeah. But yeah, it would be an interesting follow-up just to see, because here it's very discrete, right? We have 7 days, 6 weeks, and then 5 months to see whether a year or 2 years would make a further difference.
I suppose the same similar concept could be interestingly applied also to financing the food services.
Yeah. But also keep in mind, if I say the 20% return, this is really just on the monetary return, right? So what they save on their expenditures, if we account also for these potential health effects and what we find on education and the external effects, which, by the way, would also be an argument for the subsidies, of course, say the battery-based, this return is, of course, higher than the 20%, but maybe the 20% is the one that you could communicate well.
Yeah, and also this is just an average, So if we now if we now looked into the distribution of this return, it would decrease considerably for a large part of the population, right? So like 70% would have a payback period of 3, 4, 5 years. So probably you would have like a considerable rate of return for the upper 20-30%. But not for the majority, not for the majority of households.
That's not such a bad thing if the households have a really good rate of return and they're the ones to take it.
Yeah, that's fine. It's just you wouldn't achieve the 100% thing, which is the goal.
Michael, I think we are in this discussion, your presentation circling around households' direct benefits and willingness to pay. But we should also be interested in social returns. The most beautiful effects of the early electrification programs in Bangladesh was growth education and decline in fertility rates. Households will not factor that in their willingness to pay. What's your guesstimates? That would justify a huge subsidy if you bring down a 3% population growth to 1.5, like Bangladesh did. So, from a development perspective, that's the issue which I would like to push you to extend your research.
Well, first, the thing on the fertility, because we also worked on this in Indonesia, and indeed we also find these kind of effects. But we think about the social returns. If I just can go back to the the initial slide, I mean, what we found in our previous experiment are these effects on, the potential effects on health and on education. So that is then also what we say, use in our argument to say, well, it could be a solution to pay subsidies, and there could be a justification for this, because it's not only about private returns, it's also about social returns. Now, if you want to use this in a comparison, say off-grid solar technology versus the grid electricity, well, sure, I guess the social returns can be much higher if at the end you have the grid electricity. And again, we would not say that you will never cater these households with grid electricity, but given the really many poor remote areas for the moment, these kind of technologies could be a good bridging solution, would also achieve social returns, but later we may even generate more of them by having the grid electricity. But it's, well, at the end it's a cost-benefit analysis one could try,
but your
to
willingness
make.
to pay approach does not capture the social benefit.
No, it does. Well, we do not exactly, some households may have this in mind, but it's very unlikely, of course, but that's exactly what we say. If you think of this, of the perspective of a policymaker who now has to decide on a subsidy, you could say, well, part of this, can be paid by the households, and probably they pay something that should correspond a bit to their own return, or at least perceived return, and then, we can take tax money or whatever aid money to pay an additional subsidy, and this is covered somehow by the social return. But there's a nice paper where exactly this kind of experiment is made for grid electricity that we somehow use in the introduction of our paper, where they conclude that, they compare also the private returns to the investment costs that you have with the grid electricity, and then make some speculation what the social returns are, but they somehow find that there's still a huge gap in this kind of context between somehow the returns we expect and the cost you have to make. So this would again be an argument, to go for smaller devices, at least in the medium term.
Right.
I don't know whether you want to add something.
No. I think we continue in the coffee break. We will have time to come back to such questions after the next presentation. So a round of applause to our featured speakers. We will be out there for, say, 20 minutes or so. Enjoy the discussions, visit the posters, come back, and we listen to the next presentation and then have a cross coffee. Great.
Do I owe you still anything? No. That's always the question. Everything you have sent, I have commented. Correct? So now I'm waiting for input from you. We need to see more.
And there will be one more presentation.
Yeah, but that was in the second thing. That was
Oh, this was on the second
that was the Frankfurt part of the session.
No, I was presenting our results of our paper.
we need to continue. By the way, this session is live streamed, and so the audience is not only sitting in Bonn, but I'm just told one is sitting in Uruguay. Jörg Peters, please take the floor. We're eagerly listening to short-run subsidies and long-run adoption. Now we shift to West Africa, cooking stoves, Senegal. It's a fascinating topic. Please.
Thank you, Professor Brown. Hello, everybody. Hello, world. So now we move to West Africa indeed, and actually also to the next or the second energy service that is used by households in Africa. So cooking, and the first thing maybe to notice that electricity is in fact basically never used for cooking in Africa, except for South Africa maybe. So otherwise it's all biomass actually, or maybe LPG in urban areas. This study is pretty similar to the one that Michael presented. It's actually also financed, at least the data collection is also financed by ZEF and BMZ. So thanks for this. And it's also similar in terms of the method that we used, and also the research questions are also at least partly comparable. So I can economize some time on these slides then. How does it work? So I've got two slides, kind of two background or kind of introductory slides, one sober one and one more personal one. That's the next one. This is a sober one, and it's basically the same thing that also Michael presented and Alisha. So it summarizes the situation, which is that 3.1 billion people. This figure, kind of changes from publication to publication. So it's like around 3 billion people are still using solid fuels for the cooking purposes. In developing countries, and in particular in rural Africa, it's very much prevailing that people use firewood, and this is something that the international community is tackling through various policy initiatives. Also, the Sustainable Energy for All initiative is claiming that this should be ended by 2030. So people should be provided by improved or clean cooking opportunities. In the next basically the next 13 years, which is quite soon. So various studies have found that improved cook stoves do work. Some also find that they don't. So that's a different discussion. So in this study, we kind of assume, for good reasons, as I will outline later, we assume that cook stoves do work. Okay, and actually, we will test in this paper whether free distribution of improved cook stoves at one point in time increases or decreases the willingness to pay of households or recipient households in the future. So now this research question, or this kind of a almost personal thing that I'm interested in, and the basis of this is in the last 7-8 years I've been working together with Gunther, my co-author. We've been working on cook stove impacts, cook stove dissemination, cook stove adoption in Africa, at least a large part of our time. And in this period, we have had a couple of discussions with practitioners from different organizations, without naming them now, and we've been discussing about cook stoves and how to disseminate them. And the ICS practitioners always said that we have to establish markets for cook stoves, and people have to pay cost-covering prices, because otherwise it will not be sustainable. And then we would say, and I would say, that's a very good idea, but these people, they are dirt poor and they will not be able to pay these cost-covering prices. Maybe that's perhaps a problem. And the ICS practitioner would respond that that then we have to kind of convince them that cook stoves are very important, and more important also than cell phones, which they all have. And I agree, and I would say that this is their decision and not ours. Maybe being a neoliberal economist, and I also think that they will always go for the cell phone anyhow, and so we might just consider subsidizing these cook stoves if we are convinced by their benefits for both the environment and also their private account. So why not just subsidize them or give them away for free? And that's the point of the discussion, at which we kind of strongly disagree and maybe even end up in an argument. And the ICS practitioner would say that we should never do this. That's kind of something like a crime. We will destroy markets for the next 50 years and kind of spoil future sustainable policies. So this is the background of this, paper, of this study, and we kind of decided to look into this question, this debate more rigorously by doing this experiment in Senegal. So yeah, again, the literature is kind of similar to what Michael presented. It circulates around the cost-sharing question. So can the poor afford to pay cost-covering prices? There are a couple of papers out there, mostly on health-related products, so malaria, bed nets, and vaccination, these kind of things. So this branch of literature, so these economists, they kind of conclude that yes, in some cases we can actually subsidize products, given that they create external effects, and otherwise adoption is too low. And the other branch of literature then circulates around the practitioner's concern, which is, if we translate this into the academic language, this would be called, reference dependence. The practitioner claims that if we give away cook stoves for free today, they will just expect in the future also to pay zero prices, and they will not be able, or not be able to, they will not be willing to pay positive or prices and in particular no cost covering prices, and that's what the psychological literature calls reference dependence. That's one effect that is linked to this. Is there any question?
No, I was joking. Maybe they'll stop buying food then.
if we.
I mean, it sort of sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? I mean,
the prior of the.
Well, I mean, of course they're not going to pay anything for another cook stove since they already have one for free, but they'll still be buying other things. It's
right,
sort of
in the short,
to see that they won't understand that.
Yeah, no, in the short run, yes, but the claim would be that even in the long run, so even if the cook stove deteriorates and cannot be used anymore, the prior would be that the future willingness to pay is close to zero, because they simply expect that it will be given away for free again. Okay. And that's certainly true, it's very plausible, but at the same time there's a second effect that might be at work, and that's learning. People might simply not be convinced by the potential benefits or by the benefits of a new technology if they don't know it, which is the case for cook stoves, improved cook stoves in most rural areas. They don't really know it, they haven't used it so far, so they might kind of benefit from a gift cook stove by learning about the benefits. And also, that the taste is similar, for example, and other potential fears might be solved by having the opportunity to use it for a certain period, and in our case even for a whole life cycle. I will come back to this later. So this is the reference dependence versus learning effects conundrum. And there's not much out there in the economic literature, probably more in the psychological literature, but so in our area, so in the field, let's say, there hasn't been many studies. The most famous one is certainly the one by Pascaline Dupart, and that's also the one that we use, to kind of frame our paper. And compared to what Dupart did, we will, first of all, we will kind of test the replicability of what she did for malaria bed nets. In Kenya, we will replicate this for cook stoves in Senegal. That's the first contribution, and then we have to say that unlike Dupart, we are unable to disentangle between these two effects. We can only look at the aggregate effect. What happens after free distribution? Does the willingness to pay increase or decrease or remain the same? We cannot really say if it's due to learning or or how strong is the reference dependency effect and how strong is the learning effect. This we cannot really separate. But unlike her, we are actually able to test the long-run adoption effect. So she tested the effect of giving away bed nets for free 1 year later. The effect of this on the willingness to pay 1 year later, when people were still using the first bed net that they received for free. In our case, we will do it 6 years later. So by then, the cook stove will be deteriorated. The old cook stove will not be functional anymore. So we can test the long-run adoption effect and also after a full product life cycle. Yeah, this is where we are. Probably most of you know that. That's a slide for those people who are not so familiar with the developing world, let's say, or Africa. So it's Senegal, but maybe one important aspect that this slide should communicate is that it's certainly only like one region of one country. Of course, whatever we will observe here has to be might be different elsewhere. So the externality might not be huge, but I would say that at least for Western African countries, dry countries, where biomass is scarce, I would say we have a reasonable degree of externality. So here's the study setup. What we do is we exploit the exogenous variation that we created in 2009 by conducting a randomized controlled trial in the same area. So we used the same sample that we surveyed in 2009 and 2010 for an RCT. The paper is published and everything. So back then, we did together with GIZ, actually, our cooperation with GIZ, we freely distributed 100 cook stoves among 250 households in 12 villages and evaluated the impacts of this, on fuel consumption and other indicators 1 and 5 years later. And we basically found that these cook stoves work very well. They were used intensively. Firewood consumption went down significantly and also considerably, and all this. So in a nutshell, the cook stove was like successful, you could say. So for the present study, we resurveyed all of these previously sampled 250 households. In addition, actually, but just in brackets, I won't go into this detail. We additionally sampled new villages as well, just to test if there's or to kind of explore if there's some sort of general effect that we created by doing this RCT in these 12 villages, which might also spill over to our control group. Okay. So, but the main groups we use in our paper are these two groups, treatment and control group, that we created in 2009 in our randomized control trial. So this is the baseline situation. The stoves that people use, in the absence of improved cook stoves, and these are open fire stoves, 3 stone stoves, and very, very simple, basically open fire metal stoves, and then also very simple traditional metal stoves, which are a little bit better, let's say, than the 3 stone open fire, but still pretty inefficient. The combustion process is very inefficient. And that's the stove, on this picture. This is the improved cook stove. It's also a relatively simple improved cook stove. There are also these kind of spacecrafts out there that are like, that use fans to improve the combustion process and everything, and that basically are gasifier stoves. They gasify locally, they gasify the firewood or the charcoal or pellets or whatever, and thereby they can be pretty clean, almost comparable to LPG or electricity. And this is not the case for this stove. So this stove is not supposed to generate health effects, or let's say to decrease smoke emissions to a degree that should be sufficient to generate health effects. But it has proven to be effective in terms of firewood consumption, decreasing firewood consumption. This is kind of proven both in the lab and also by a couple of field studies that we did in the country, including the RCT that I mentioned. It's also widely used in other countries. It's not a new stove that has been developed for Senegal or something. It has been also used or disseminated in Kenya and Malawi, I think, and a couple of other countries. So it's kind of a standardized product. It's also produced locally, not in China or so. And the retail price is quite low, cheap, $10 more or less, which is 5,000 francs CFA. In the local currency. I will come back to this number later. Yeah, I think I already mentioned the findings of our 2009 RCT. So next slide is this one. So yeah, as I said, we pretty much did the same as we also did with Michael in Rwanda on the solar kits and panels. We elicited the revealed willingness to pay using the same experimental approach, this Becker-de-Groot-Marshak mechanism. So we visited each household, of our RCT sample from 2009. We visited each household individually and explained the rules of the game and everything, and then we asked him or her to make a bid, having explained already that only if the bid exceeds the price that we will draw, he or she will have the opportunity to actually buy the stove. you know, and we also did a test, kind of a test trial. In this case, we tested it like with a hypothetical offer of a solar lantern, funnily. So we basically made them kind of go through the process hypothetically for a solar lantern to make sure that they understand the process before we really made the offer of the cook stove, which is at the core of our interest in this study. So the point here is also, and also the important is that we also draw the random prize openly, so in a public gathering in the village center, which looked like this more or less. So this is the cook stove, you know, at the right hand side. That's the improved cook stove that we used primarily, and the urn and the balls and everything. Right, and yeah. So now, yeah.
Just a quick question. Using this group of individuals so that you had used in the previous RCT, would it not perhaps overstate your outcomes later on, because perhaps they are more educated in the sense that now they understand they are better off than the rest who were never part of any experiments before, and
right.
also saying they've been exposed to such kind of, such kind of a game or something like this before?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I wouldn't expect that the cook stove really changes, you know, the whole life of the household. So they will not be better off in all dimensions. I think that this concern is not really a concern. I would say this thinking, but what might be true is that people, you know, they have been exposed to this randomized control trial, and there were these animateurs sociaux, you know, people who went, so our field team who went there and talked to them, and, you know, like 3-4 data collection waves. So this exposure to, let's say, the outside world might have changed the culture in these villages. Is that what you are aiming at?
Yeah, because my imagination is that these are the people that perhaps have seen already benefit of the initial RCT that you did, and therefore the anticipation in this case is that this is also something very important or something good for us. And therefore, then the uptake of their bidding or their willingness to, whatever the bidding they would do, would be based on the knowledge that we did this before and it worked for us. And therefore, this time around, it might be more beneficial.
Yeah, so I would say to the degree that this thinking relates to the cook stove itself, to the technology itself, that's part of a treatment effect, and that's fine. We want to capture this. That's a learning effect then, right? That's fine. But if it goes beyond this learning effect, like you know, simply the mere fact that they have been in touch with our field team and everything, this might have changed their attitude towards other things, you know, and that would then be something like a Hawthorne effect. And this is of course a concern. And in a way to kind of not test for this, we cannot really rule this out. But for this purpose, we also surveyed new villages that haven't seen anybody, at least you know, no one from our team or something. No cook stove intervention at all, and this is a 6 village sample which I mentioned earlier, right? So it's
Did women participate directly?
Yeah.
Looking at the picture.
Yeah, I mean mostly men. So we asked the household to send the household member who is responsible for like financial issues, you know, who takes decisions on these things, which in most cases was the male or a male household chief. I think 60% of our respondents were male, 40% women. And that's of course an important thing, you know, because of course cooking is like a female issue in most of Africa, and it might be different if you approach the household differently. So, but our idea now in this study was to kind of mimic the business as usual, you know, like how would a typical marketing approach would work, you know, and they wouldn't, like a company wouldn't do a household marketing game or something, so they would simply approach the household and ask them if they want to make the investment or not, and that was also our idea. But it's of course an important aspect. So let's move now to the results. That's typical descriptive table. The important thing is, first of all, the randomization was successful. As you can see, there is no statistical significant difference between the two groups in the right-hand column. But then also, surprisingly, we found a couple of improved cook stoves that are still functional actually in our sample, which was a surprise, because our stoves So these 20% also include our own stoves, so the old 2009 stoves, which are basically worn out. So they still had them in their kitchen or in their home, but they didn't use them anymore because they were deteriorated. But in addition, there are also 10% of households who had new improved cook stoves, which was a surprise. And actually, we found out that just in 2 or 3 villages, I think there had been a program, like any NGO or something had distributed cook stoves for free or at strongly severely subsidized prices a while ago. So we have to be careful about this kind of subgroup, and basically we will exclude them from the analysis, at least as a robustness check later on.
But this would tell us now there's no learning, right? Just from this evidence. Or do I read this wrongly? Because
I hope so.
The ownership is 20% in each case, or?
Yeah, let's say 10%. So it's 10% the old stoves and 10% new stoves, but they receive them more or less for free.
Yeah, but the same in the control.
Right.
Yeah,
Well, I have to say that there is no market, right? So it is very difficult to get an improved cook stove in these villages. That's an important.
Okay, like the control group. So how did they get the stoves? I mean, what is puzzling that it's now you say 10% bought a new one.
Yeah.
Now they caught up, right? The control group.
I guess then I mean, these must be the new stoves then. I'm not really sure, but these are not our stoves. So the 20% in control.
Yeah, of course. But so either no learning at all has taken place in the treatment group, or there was at least some learning in the control group, so that the two groups converged, right? So it's both at 20%.
Yeah.
I mean, didn't you expect a difference between the two?
This is before.
A difference?
When is that?
This is before, right?
This is
sorry.
2009.
No, that's before our study now. So before
the willingness to pay experiment,
right.
But after the RCT, the free distribution.
Yeah. It's 2015 data, yes.
Yeah, exactly. But would you not have expected that at least some of the households would have renewed their stove?
But they couldn't, because the stove was not available, except for these 3 villages in which an NGO distributed them for more or less for free, I think. Okay, but still, I mean, yes, I would say yes. I was not surprised, but maybe we were expecting that some of the treatment households would have made an effort to get a new one, because if you really want one, you get it. It's available in towns like nearby, 20 kilometers away or something.
Okay, maybe one question, but then I stopped. What was the shares in, say, 2009? Zero.
I think.
Okay, so there's a light
maybe
uptake over time in both groups.
But I wouldn't interpret this as a trend. I think,
no, that was not what I wanted to say, but just both groups made similar investments into this technology, but say at least descriptively no evidence that any learning has taken place in the treatment group that resulted also in the purchase of a stove.
Exactly. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's listen a bit more. Yeah. That learning question you come back to,
yes.
Okay.
I mean, so we cannot really separate the effects, as I said earlier. And I have to think about this point. If you can really interpret the 20% in the control group there, I have to discuss this with Gunther and look into the data. I'm not sure. So there is some. It's a good point, but I don't think there's much to take out of this. But it's true. So maybe the message also is that there hasn't been learning to the degree that people made a huge effort to renew their cook stove. That's maybe important to emphasize at this point, indeed. So here's the result, and that's the willingness to pay for the new cook stove in our 2 groups. So ICS Experience is the treatment group, and obviously the other one is the control group, and that's all 12 villages now. And first thing, just without looking into any standard deviation and everything, it's larger in the treatment group. So so the first kind of stylized interpretation is that at least it did not decrease. Like having experienced the reception of a free cook stove does not decrease your willingness to pay. Now we have to exclude the 3 villages that received the cook stoves from somewhere else, and it's intuitive. The willingness to pay increases overall for both groups. And the green dotted line is the in-town market price. It's not the local market. It's in the market in towns like nearby, 10 or 20 kilometers away. And it's a surprising result for us, that people on average make bids that are considerably higher than what GIZ also calls the market price. So all these people could have made this effort to go to the town, to these towns nearby to get a new cook stove, having made the positive experience with the old one.
Time is money.
Excuse me?
Time is money.
Yes, in our world, yes. I mean, as Michael said earlier, time is not so much money in most parts of Africa. Maybe I don't agree 100%, but I think it's true that these simple calculations do not really work out. So I mean, time is money, yes, but they spend so much time on firewood collection that this argument actually is an argument in favor of making the effort to go to the next town and get a new cook stove.
What is the exchange rate? Maybe it's just about transportation costs.
Yeah, we made some calculus on this, but it's
they buy other stuff as well in the towns.
Right.
Yeah. They have many goods in their house that are not bought in the village.
What is the exchange rate?
It's 650 €1.
Okay.
So this is
€10.
So 5,000 is like $10. This in-town market price is $10 around. Okay. Yeah. So that's basically the key result of our study, and so for us it was surprising to see that the willingness to pay is so high, but it was also kind of satisfying to see that that the giving away treatment does not decrease the willingness to pay in the long run. So that's actually the core finding of our study. So now, that's just to show like how this looks like if we run regressions, and I think the most important one is the right column. That's the restricted sample in which we exclude these 3 villages, that were exposed to this NGO kind of distribution program. And what you see basically is that it's kind of noisy, so it's not really super precise, this effect. And I wouldn't claim any statistical significance for the full sample, but in the restricted case, it's borderline significant, at least as soon as we control for typical socioeconomic variables. It's 8%, so the p-value is 8%, as you see in the in brackets. And I think that's given a relatively small sample size, I think that's okay. To interpret this as let's say borderline statistically significant. But even if it wasn't higher, so our prior actually is that giving away cook stoves does not decrease the willingness to pay. So I think here we can be safe that at least the reference dependence effect does not overcompensate the learning effect. At least it's at par, I would say. So here's the demand curve. As Michael said, using this method, you can even with small sample sizes, you can approximate the demand curve, and just to kind of visualize what I've just said, that a large part of the population or of the sample makes bids higher than this in-town market price. Actually, 75% submit bids that are higher than this in-town market price, and this is actually something we have to think about. So why isn't the market there? What is the rate of return basically that enterprises would need to really approach or exploit this so far unserved market? That's something I think we should think about, because it's to a certain degree it's a surprise to see such a high willingness to pay. So here we are. That's the epilogue. I hope to have a conversation with these ICS practitioners soon again, not just via the World Wide Web camera. And then I hope to kind of catch up. Remember that he or she was always replying and kind of freaking out that we should never subsidize, let alone give away cook stoves for free, because this destroys markets in the long run. And I would now respond, no, it doesn't. We tested it in Senegal using a long-run randomized control trial, and free distribution actually increased the willingness to pay in the future. And then he or she would say that, yeah, okay, that's interesting, but isn't this just one country? And I would say, yes, that's true. We should replicate this elsewhere, of course. And then the ICS practitioner would also say that, didn't you say that these people are dirt poor and cannot afford paying cross-covering prices? They can. And I would be slightly embarrassed and reply that, yes, that's true, they can. The willingness to pay is in fact much higher than I expected. But is it really cross-covering? You know, that's something we have to think about. Like, you know, what are the rates of returns that enterprises need, producers need in these relatively risky markets? And then he would or she would reply, it's really, really interesting, and we should really pilot our stove programs using these weird randomized control trials in all our programs. Thanks.
Great.
It's really interesting. You know, there are so few, according to my observation, maybe you have a quick comment on that, so few repeated RCTs which can check into the stability of the first round RCT effects, which I think is a major reason why policymakers remain unconvinced so often. You have the one-shot RCT and didn't test a few years later the stability of the findings. So you have the basis for that. And that's methodologically also very important. Your questions, colleagues? Okay.
Yeah, it's also something negative about improved cook stoves, like it takes longer time to cook, I think, that the normal ones, so maybe that would be one point for not adopting them. Because, yeah, indeed the price doesn't seem so high, just $10 even for cook people in Senegal. I wonder.
Yeah, no, in general, that's a concern. I think this particular cook stove is fairly well adapted, thanks to the work that also GIZ has done in the field in the last 20 years, let's say. But of course, yeah, there are so-called improved cook stoves which have like very practical disadvantages, strings attached, and they don't really, basically or effectively, they are not really improved because they have, it's so difficult to use them. It takes so much time. It's not adapted to the meals that people cook, stuff like this. So in general, I would say that's oftentimes a reason for bad results on cook stoves, but in this case, actually not.
Can you say more? Is this really a slow food cooker? I mean, how significant is the slowliness of cooking with these?
So I think that's actually faster even, this one. This one is actually faster.
But you postulated they may take more time. Can you say more about that?
I just read it. I don't know much. Just for what I've read, there are many prototypes of improved cook stoves, and the majority of them, yeah, they are more efficient, like the burning is slower, so that's why maybe they demand less firewood.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it takes longer time till the flame is there.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I don't have this thing. So
can you say more? What is really the best technology? What's the best cook stove that is either on the market or in distribution? How does it? Is this?
I mean, it depends on your objective. So if you really emphasize health effects, as you also mentioned in your comment at the beginning of this workshop. So if you really emphasize health effects, then probably these cook stoves would not be improved enough. Let's say. Then we would have to go for more sophisticated ones, which are of course also much more expensive.
Those with the chimney, a little bit.
Chimney stoves, or these fan stoves that kind of gasify the charcoal or the firewood, in the combustion chamber. But these stoves are really expensive. So even the very new ones are like $30-40 US at least. Compared to $10 US here. So I would say if you also concentrate on objectives like related to environmental aspects, so deforestation, but also maybe black carbon emissions, climate relevant emissions. I think these cheaper but still field-tested improved cook stoves, they bear very high potentials in terms of, because their cost effectiveness is much higher.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Or-
in the same line. I mean, I guess it's very true that like this improved cooking stock may not be very practical for some kind of food you're cooking, and especially if the household size is bigger in the rural areas. This will not be very efficient because the kind of firewood that you need to use is like this one in the picture. You don't have time to cut into small pieces and then put them in the small stove and all this. So usually the open stove is the easiest for women in the rural areas and the easiest for everybody. You put firewood. Of course, it's not efficient, but it's quick. You are able to put as much firewood as you can, and you're able to cook your food immediately and quickly. In most rural areas in Africa, and I guess Kenya, Senegal, and many other countries, there is not a lot of time to prepare firewood further from splitting the wood and putting in the fire. Not unless you're using charcoal, which is also another level up high, which is also expensive and different. So this kind of improved stove is very, very efficient. It's able to keep the fire longer and the heat longer in itself, and it's efficient in that in the sense that you're able to use as much heat as possible. But in terms of practicality, you have large cooking pot.
Okay, we got the point.
No, but I
would
think,
you say a word? Does one need to split the wood in order to heat
to
this?
chop it? Yes, but,
Yes,
but
to
that's
chop.
actually all you have to do differently compared to the 3 stone stove. You have to chop it, and this takes like, I don't know, a few minutes at most. But actually, I mean, we're talking about the wrong thing here, because this stove seems to be great. People are really willing to pay much money for it. So in general, I would agree that there are many cook stoves that are not practical, as I said earlier. That's certainly a concern or a problem in many other cases, and you have to test this you have to test this in depth before you roll out any program, of course. And that's also, I would say, what at least GIZ does. They do test stoves before they distribute them, which not everybody does. Of course, there are programs, large programs that start rolling out cook stoves that are just improved in theory, but not in the field, and that might not be adopted by the people because, for whatever practical reason. I agree, but I think this stove actually, well, apparently I would say, is okay for the people, and this chopping wood thing, of course, it takes time, but I mean, so does firewood collection. So, I think at the end of the week they will notice that,
it's not only proven by the willingness to pay. In the previous study, you showed a return of 45 or 49%. So people didn't leave it in the corner; they used it and saved wood.
Could I ask, is anyone from our GIZ colleagues in the room who can comment on that?
Yes.
Do you have the best prototype, and how does it compare to this one?
No, this is a very complex question. You cannot ask it in this way.
For the
because
West
it depends,
African
no, it depends
location.
on the location where you
Yes,
are.
I understand
not,
that.
But not also on the cook stove. It depends also on the wood you use, if it has a lot of moisture or not. So this is a high input, how the stove is functioned. And also you have also to think about the user. Is the stove used in the right way? So this is a combination of these three, and not to have a look only at the stove. So if you have a really improved cook stove and it's not used with a good fuel and not used in the right way, then it's not an improved cook stove anymore.
Let's leave out the right way question.
The result is not the
How
same.
many prototypes do you have in your portfolio for cook stove programs?
How many? It depends if you are in Asia, or if you are in Africa.
Let's stick to
or
Africa
Latin
for the
America.
moment.
I cannot say a figure. You can have, as the colleague mentioned already, they are different categories. So you have a category which is around maybe up to $10, or then you have it up to over 100, and then there's also a difference in quality in between, or what is quality. So it also depends how you prepare the fuel. So if you have to chop it very, very small, and then it's maybe more efficient, but then nobody will do it.
Yeah.
And another point is also, when is an improved cook stove very, from the sustainable point of view, really sustainable? If you only see the stove by itself, or do you see the whole value chain, how it is made? So when is it clean? Or when is it only clean when you burn it, when you have it in the room? Then maybe you have less air pollution in the room, but maybe the whole production line is not sustainable or not environmental. It's an environmental issue. So it's very difficult if you ask a question like that to give a final answer to it. It's not possible.
No,
But
my
maybe-
question
maybe-
wasn't that simple. Let me come back.
Yeah, the question is simple, but the answer to it is not so simple.
Well, I've been sitting next to all sorts of cooking stoves and 3 stones, so I know the diversity. But what puzzles me is that there is so much. When you walk a market in West or East Africa, you find lots of different cook stoves. Some are Volkswagens and others are Mercedeses. I know that. But in order to...
Others are Volkswagen saying
yeah.
Is Volkswagen good or not?
Well, and they're maybe leadership of Volkswagen cook stoves were also fooling the technical agencies. But I'm still puzzled, and a study recently done by our colleague from IFPRI in Malawi assessed all these different cook stoves, and there was a huge mixing, Alicia, you know it, a huge diversity of subsidy programs, each NGO subsidizing differently, a huge difference in advocacy programs. My cook stove is the best in the world. So I'm looking to you and asking what for which environment and what wood situation, maybe even seasonally, when it's wet or not so wet, what are the best prototypes? I don't back out of that question.
Okay.
We can. I mean, it's. Do we find that somewhere on somebody's website?
No, it is just. Let me make one remark. There is one very good improved cook stove. It's called the Sama Sama. It's produced in South Africa, and it's used less of wood, and it's really nice made. You can have it in different colors. This is also an issue. So often they make a mistake that something has to be cheap. It doesn't have to be nice. So it looks really nice, and also it's very efficient, and it's really high recommended.
Okay.
So I can send you some
That's the
information
best
about
one.
that.
Interesting.
I will not say it's the best for every situation because
No,
we
no,
do
no.
not. But please let me finish my sentence. Because we do not recommend only one stove. So if people are in the situation that they can afford 2 stoves, then we recommend it's good to have a mixture of different sources.
Okay.
So we do not even talk about the energy ladder, as mentioned before in the former presentation. It was in your presentation on slide 7, I just remember, because it's not a way of a ladder, it's more a system that you have different sources of energy side by side. And because if you have different meals or different part of meals, you need a different heat.
Okay.
So if you are simmering something, then you need a lower heat, and you can use a different fuel, maybe it's cheaper. Or even if you want to make clean drinking water, then you can use a cheap solar cooker. It's also affordable for $4 something. And then you can reduce or you can increase the health issue with that. So it's a combination.
Yeah.
So you cannot say this is the best for
Point well
everything.
taken.
It's not the one
Yeah.
single stove. Actually, it's a system.
No, that much we have.
Yeah.
We are certainly in agreement that there's not one size fits all, one
Yes.
technology fits all. But I find it bewildering that there are hundreds of different models pushed by different agencies, and that we have such slow progress on the use of cook stoves in sub-Saharan Africa. Back to you. I didn't want to take over the debate. Any comments on that one? Were there more than one cook stove of the improved type in the households, or did you see parallel use of cook stove, improved, 3 stones, different types? So the multiple use of technology.
Yeah.
Can you comment on that? It was a very important point.
No, I can just simply confirm that sort of. That's what people call stove stacking. You know, they definitely use multiple stoves at the same time. So sometimes for the same meal, even they use two or 3 stoves. Of course, yeah, sure. So one improved cook stove is not enough to kind of crowd out the inefficient 3-stone stove completely.
Mhm.
That's
Okay.
very simple, I think.
Any more questions at this stage on the cook stove presentation? Because in a moment we will settle them down here and we will have a bit more cross-cutting energy policy discussion. Please.
Just to confirm your point, I mean, if you look on the International Cook Stove Alliance website, you see hundreds of models, and it is bewildering. And so I wonder if there's some effort to give star ratings, so people can, for any given type, they can choose. Maybe there's one type like this, it's only energy saving. Maybe there's the other type for $40 that is both energy saving and life saving. And people can choose the best ones if they have some advice. But if there's hundreds to choose from, they may just wait for whatever they get for free.
No, but that's not really the problem. You don't get these stoves. I mean, the stoves that you see on the GACC website, you don't find them in Africa at all. Actually, these are spacecrafts for them. So they.
Yeah, but what do you think about the rating idea? Rating cook stoves by users and by experts who can assess the health effects, couldn't be just users.
I mean, let's separate the health effects thing for the time being, because that's you end up in a different segment immediately. I think this rating and testing thing, that's what GIZ really does very well, I would say. Maybe I would do it a bit more systematically with larger sample sizes to see really like the different preferences and what people can pay, and stuff like this. But I do think that at least in their programs, they know what people prefer, and how they cook, which is not the case for every program or agency. And then this GACC cook stoves, as I said, this is a different segment. That's people would never ever buy them by themselves in Africa, except for LPG in urban areas, which is a different thing. So actually at least, the bottom line, in my views, also summarizing up this discussion, but that's also the purpose of our study, is to reconsider subsidies. I mean, the benefits of, and people at GIZ hate that. If subsidies, yes. Because of, they have been fighting against free distribution programs, in the 80s and 70s already, and also in the 90s maybe still. That's a bit like in a nutshell, the psychology behind that maybe. But I think we should reconsider this, given the this urgency of like climate. The climate relevance is very high. Even for these simple cook stoves, the climate relevance is very high. But then if you bring health, to the agenda, then of course you have to consider subsidies, because these cook stoves are never ever affordable so these spacecraft cook stoves are never ever affordable for a rural household who collects firewood and doesn't pay for it, for the firewood.
Exciting discussion. I think it's absolutely essential to factor in the health aspects, and technology cannot be separated. Hold your questions. I want to settle them here because we are already in cross-cutting issues. You have a word in a moment. Michael and Alicia, please settle down here, and you will have the first comments in a moment. I think we are already in the discussion of technology, economics, health, comprehensive assessment of energy strategies. And in order to remain connected to the last presentation, I suggest that's where we stay for a moment. And I think ask ourselves a few difficult questions, such as why so slow progress with cook stove utilization. But there were two hands up here, and I would like to have the two of you first say what you wanted to say.
It was just in the connection from your last question on the gas stoves. It also taken to be into account where the production site. So if you are focusing on a local production, then you will have another stove where you say, or which you would recommend, as if you go for import and export issues. Huh? So this is one point also to think about if you speak or if you ask which is the best stove. So I just wanted to mention this point.
I just thought your point about the life-saving cook stove being 4 times as expensive and therefore not affordable was interesting. I mean, clearly, it seems from your willingness to pay data that a lot of these people wouldn't be willing or able to pay the $40. At the same time, if 4 million people a year are dying from bad stoves, and I guess 3 billion people are using stoves, and approximately every year 1 out of 750 people using the cook stove is dying. So you multiply 750 by $30, it's like, okay, maybe I'm ignorant, but you can do a calculation like this, and is the life worth $2,000? Of course, So clearly it's worth it from a governmental and societal perspective, to subsidize these if necessary, if they can afford it at all. And it seems like a very easy thing for development agencies, like donating 0.7% of the GDP of Denmark or whatever, to support.
Alicia, you had a figure there about DALIs. If you multiply them by $1 a day, poor people opportunity cost, which is a crude way to assess the health costs. This was several billions right away.
Yes, and so it's 40 million daily loss per year. So that's in terms of health costs and productivity and many other aspects. So this is the health effect. But even before we reach the health effect in terms of energy use of the cook stove and overall other technologies, one of the suggestions was that using these improved cook stoves will help with higher energy use efficiency. Will help, for example, reduce allow to use less fuel wood. Yeah, but I'm afraid that may not be the case. Ever since Jevons 100 years ago, it was found that increasing energy use efficiency will not reduce the energy use. It will actually increase energy use. So this may be good. People need more energy, but assuming that, okay, if we using these technologies, we use energy use efficiency, as a result, there will be less fuel wood and we will save the forests. That may be a wrong, that may not necessarily happen.
Alicia, sorry, explain to us, the energy efficiency of growing economies is rapidly increasing. So, say, over the last 50 years, Germany, Brazil, or whoever you look at, use less and less units of energy per incremental unit of growth, of economic growth. So why would you not expect that at the bottom of the income distribution of nations?
Yes, unit per...
We use about half as much energy now per unit of growth, and even China is down to much less.
Yes, what I'm saying,
elasticity is close to zero.
Yeah, per unit it is declining, so energy efficiency, but overall energy use.
The level of
overall energy use. That is.
So there's let me maybe add something. So I certainly agree. So you cannot just scale, the micro effect on household level. Like let's assume 30%, 40% firewood savings. You cannot scale this to the macro effect. If you suppose you give a cook stove to everybody, it will certainly be less because there is this macroeconomic rebound effect. That's how energy economists refer to that phenomenon. But it will not be at 100%. So it will certainly eat up a certain share of these 30-40% savings, but not all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think that's. Of course, we don't know how high it is. So the rebound effect.
Colleagues, I would like to jump a bit out of the individual conversations related to the specific presentations and ask a more broad-based question about what should be our future research agenda in the field of energy access in remote rural areas. How would research best be prioritized to bring us closer to faster success? maybe, Michael, you could argue first a bit what research priorities would help us on the pathway to energy access and efficient energy utilization in remote rural areas.
Well, I think it should continue a bit along the lines that we have outlined today. That is a lot about, say, what is the right technology for these different purposes that we have, and what is the best mechanism to increase adoption. So how can we overcome these problems of, one is affordability, but then also awareness and knowledge about different technologies, and how do these different things interact together. So that I think we should not be too optimistic that these the grid electricity, for instance, will help us to reach this 2030 goal alone. So we need these off-grid technologies, and so looking into the cost effectiveness and the adoption that I think can help us to overcome the gap that we see the most rapidly.
Mm-hmm. Alicia, where do you see the priorities in research?
Also, as the way I presented earlier, in a lot of the research areas, especially at the macro level, energy issues are often studied separately from other aspects of household activities, while they are very closely related. So one of the areas for future research would be to look at the energy use, production, and other agricultural activities of households, including what we found in the research, their labor allocations, non-farm impacts together. That may be one of the ways to better understand what are the drivers of adoption of new energy sources and technologies, and what are the barriers for them.
Mm-hmm. Jörg, what do you see? Where do you see the research frontiers, both technologically and in socioeconomics?
Yeah, well, I think technologically many things will be solved by others, let's say. So, for example, the PV technology and storage capacities and all this is, prices or costs are decreasing kind of anyhow, at least from our perspective. Engineers are solving these problems. And maybe the same even happens on the cooking side, because new models are coming up, and which are hopefully more and more adapted to cooking habits. So I think, or probably we have to think about the adoption question, yes, and how to either build up sustainable supply chains, which is extremely difficult for cook stoves now mainly. But in general, personally, I think we should, yeah, as I said earlier, we should rethink subsidies, and in particular then think about how smart subsidy schemes could look like. Of course, I'm not naive. You cannot just distribute these cook stoves for free all over the place in whatever African country. So you have to kind of think about some sort of feed-in tariff, like subsidy scheme for African countries, in order to I'm too impatient to wait for the market to solve this problem in a way, because it's too kind of urgent, or at least it offers so many benefits also from our perspective, thinking about climate issues and least cost CO2 abatement strategies. And I think developing smart subsidy schemes might be easier than creating sustainable supply chains.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Emmanuel, you had a question.
I think the discussion on subsidies, and I kind of find it really exciting, also taken from Michael's paper. You found that the two solar products, one, they were able to pay 76% of the price, and the other one was also roughly above 50% and above. The one of $200 and something was, the deficit was almost 150% less. Now, Rwanda has per capita income of less than, just about $500, and the expectation of a rural household in a deep remote village paying more than half of the per capita income on one energy product in a year would be extremely unbearable. But there just one more product, one product less that, they are willing to pay 76% of the actual price, of the market price. So this household needs a subsidy of 24% just to get the product. Some of these subsidies are actually, it could be a good entry for governments to actually do some of these things. So working on subsidy products would be good. I think Rwanda also, not just because it's a small country, so easy to manage these programs, but also the way they've scaled up health insurance, but also in the last 3 years, 4 years, they've actually done amazing things on rural housing, removing grass thatched houses and stuff like that. So they could be done this.
I think you made a point. Jörg, would you like to comment on what Emmanuel says?
I think that's actually happening. So Rwanda is currently, I mean, every time I go there, the policy has changed again a bit, but so last time I went there in November, so the government told me that they actually will, are you from Rwanda?
No,
Uganda. So they are now actively considering giving away these for free these simple solar kits to the like the lower poverty. I would say they say to me. So the poverty line, let's say. So the poorest households, poorest like 40% or so. That so they will get such a thing for free. That at least that's what they told me.
Yeah.
But Rwanda is of course different, you know, because it's a very kind of effective government, let's say, positively put, and it's not the same in all other African countries.
I still would like to stick a bit to the research agenda. Where is the need to invest in better knowledge, and if you maybe focus on that and to pester our panel.
Thank you very much. I wonder, I mean, we heard some remarks about the experience with solar kits and efficient lighting and things, and then on the other hand, the experience with the cook stoves. And I wonder if there could be more useful research comparing the success of the one with the slower progress than the other. And I guess there's some differences. For example, people attach a huge value to having some light in the evening and being able to communicate on a cell phone, where before they might have had to travel over 25 kilometers of roads each way to do a commercial transaction or buy something. But a huge value for people. On the one hand, I guess, because that market, you're talking about people that have cell phones already, is a relatively easy kind of payment scheme via the cell phone. They don't get to charge their cell phone unless they make a payment. But I wonder, on the one hand, is there something there, some of those methods, payment methods could be transferred, to increase the market uptake of the efficient stoves. And then I also wonder whether there's some communication effort that could be done to improve people's understanding of the benefits. Like, hey, you're not going to die of cancer when you buy this stove. It may not be as great, it may not be so obvious to you right now, but you're going to be happy you got this. I don't really know. But so are there some communications aspects of the lighting PV programs that could be transferred, and some payment aspects of the lighting PV programs that could be transferred to the cook stove space, or any other lessons, reasons that it's working or not working.
Yeah. A reaction? Anyone from the panel? Behavioral change, information campaigns, wonderful topic for experimentation, by the way.
So we are actually preparing a follow-up study to this in Senegal, in which we will also test different kind of sensitization, awareness raising campaigns. Although it's not really specified yet how it will look like, but that's certainly one thing we will think about, like comparing different approaches, so different ways to approach the household and to convince.
I mean, the health behavior we can adopt. One has been exemplified by the BedNet campaigns, by sanitation and drinking water behavior campaigns. But Michael, any comment?
I just want to add that I think what is often missing so far is a bit of critical mass, right? So these programs, they are very isolated, so there are a few villages that are covered here and there, but it doesn't really become a common knowledge. So some people know, but it's not reflected in the thoughts of others, so it's not that you would be in contact again and again with this knowledge, so people may also forget very rapidly about this. And I think a proof of this is, I mean, I'm really a bit surprised that the uptake in your experiment of the treated is really zero compared to the others. And I wonder if that program had happened at a much larger scale and many more people had made the experience and people, you know, would constantly interact with others having made the experience, maybe some knowledge would have been created. And here it seems a bit, I mean, they show a higher willingness to pay, I agree, but it's not as strong as they would have made the effort, you know, to get this. And on the one hand, I agree, I mean, there's definitely a transaction cost. At the same time, I mean, there are many other goods that they buy far away, they would travel for. And I mean, you see these mini buses full of, you know, cargo coming from the city, so if they want, they can. So, and, you know, if you think of the behavioral change, you know, in things that are relevant to our societies, it's often this issue of a critical mass, right? I mean, people started to bother about smoking, and really half of the population were at the point considering this a problem, and then suddenly it goes very fast. And same for family planning. You see often that it starts to be accepted if a critical mass has overcome this taboo. And maybe we are still far from that point, and so it remains all very isolated.
Since you mentioned family planning, I just think it's fascinating, the issue that came up before, the linkage between evening lighting and birth rates, for example. But actually, I was thinking in terms of a meta study, a study of all the programs that have been done for distributing or marketing little solar kits with lighting and some charging, and perhaps some electricity for something else. And whether, you know, what the key features of success are there, and contrasting that perhaps with what's happening with the cook stoves, and see are there possibilities there.
I've seen there a few hands up. I would also like to encourage Varun to give us a bit of insights from the India context in a moment, and Chen. But on your point, this type of meta-study, I think, is urgently needed. We had discussions with Efraim Konya, our colleague, who argues that we have market failure and use failure, because it's often not a market, of cooking stoves because of confusion over quality, over durability, function, etc. And this after decades and decades of program after program. I mean, he was, I rarely see Ephraim angry, but having been halfway into such a study, that was his key point. And so somehow I think we need to get our act together in aid agencies, NGOs, and whoever is involved in that. But I've seen Oliver, your hand up, and then I would like to turn to the two of you and ask, what do you say to the African experimenters from the Chinese and the Indian perspective? Yeah? Hold on, there are two more before you.
All right. I would say that capacity and perhaps information is one aspect that is important. And also we won't forget the economic aspect that we've seen, that actually the cost sometimes is very prohibitive for the adoption of this. And I believe that one area that research and development can really play a critical role is by empowering the local community through perhaps vocational training or vocational development, such that these materials, for instance, the stoves could be made from within the local communities, perhaps because I see the clay, this can be harvested in the local communities, and we can get the metals, I mean, like the used the scrap metal, so to say, that can be used to make the stoves, and then the cost could significantly become even low. And still, of course, we give opportunities to the youth, or opportunities to the local community in terms of, making and selling these particular stoves, and also then the communities can as well purchase them cheaply.
Yeah.
We've seen, of course, in various sectors that vocational trainings and vocational development have been done, like mechanics and motor vehicle repairing and all this. Over years, in the rural areas, these services have now been, availed, and people can do this work, and perhaps at a cheaper cost compared to the cities or in other places. So perhaps the development agencies could also shift the paradigm and begin introducing these skills and development in the rural areas, so that these materials will be done from the rural areas and cost could significantly come down even by a quarter or half.
Okay, let's leave that as an interesting statement, please.
Yeah, as you were asking what can or should be done in terms of research, I mean, we can do as economists cost effectiveness analysis. As social scientists, we are more or less good in adoption studies, in identifying drivers and barriers, also institutional issues that hinder adoption or facilitate adoption. I think what we are also quite often lacking, also in terms of who is funding and which agency is running us in our research, is this interdisciplinarity. I mean, if you, at that level, you might not have much technology involved, but as soon as you go a bit larger than a solar home system, you would find engineers that tell you, yes, it's a nice technology, but the storage capacity of the battery doesn't fit to the use or the energy needs over there, or the storage needs. Or you have aerosol levels in Kanpur, in Uttar Pradesh, in India, that are so high that whatever nice fancy PV system you would put there, if it's small or big, it would never give any output in as it was calculated before, because our programming tools, our planning tools for planning the size of a PV system are usually built up on ideal cases. We just look at the radiation level, but we don't look at the local context where you have a lot of industry around and suddenly you have air pollution and it doesn't work, and so on. So you need a lot of cross-disciplinary thinking when you come back with the results. Is it an adoption just not happening because they don't like it, it's a long cooking time, or is there something wrong in the technology? And for this you would need a kind of feedback and interaction with the guys that do the engineering work on that one.
Great, transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary research. Varun, what can the Indian experience, especially from Uttar Pradesh, tell our colleagues who have looked at Ethiopia, Senegal, Rwanda?
One big concern that I see in the uptake of these off-grid decentralized energy product is the effect of politics on the behavior of households. Yeah, for example, I give you one example that in rural Uttar Pradesh, I observed that 70 or 80% of households whom I surveyed were not paying their electricity bills to the utility, because they were assuming, and that is the fact, that when election comes, the political parties waive off all the loans. Yeah. Even in the solar home system program, there was a scheme of a rural bank called NABARD, where the solar home systems were to be financed. Same thing happened. Households did not pay, and when election came, the loans were waived off. So that is the temperament of the household, which are becoming that these solar or biogas or whatever these technologies are something which will be given free of cost from the government. So even if you go with a solar mini grid, fancy solar mini grid with a lot of IT, everything, they will hesitate in giving $3, although they have a very good paying capacity, because they know that there is a grid, they can hook anytime, and if something happens, they will give 100 rupees to the lineman, things will be fixed. So I would say, and electricity bills, the tube wells, they use tube wells, they are supposed to pay $8 a month, yeah, that also they don't pay, and they pump the water, they don't only use themselves, they sell it to the entire village. So that's the tendency, and then if they have to pay, let's say, some amount for solar water pump, they will hesitate, they will. So I think that also, in my impression, that was a big concern that I
So the whole area of governance, of payment regimes, of enforcement, we hadn't touched on that, and Africa will grow into that with the grid systems, big and small. The local capture from local grid systems interconnecting a few households in a village will also maybe be an issue. So thank you for bringing up an entirely new area of study of how to establish well-functioning governance regimes in the small and large grid systems. Chen, a message from China. What lesson from China, from Sichuan, to our African friends?
From my studies, I found market failure will significant impact on household energy use in rural China. China has many unique characteristics in household energy use. The situation could maybe different from African countries, but there are some common situations among these countries. The first thing is the future policy should be focused on how to mitigate the market failure. For example, to increase the job opportunities in nearby cities, or increase educational levels of household members. And the second point is the future research. The researchers should attach more importance on the social effects of adopting the modern energy sources, and focus on how to increase the people's understandings of the social effects. For example, we know households' awareness of environment impacts or health impacts may be still lower in many rural areas. How to increase this? Or we know if we let household shift from traditional biomass energy to modern biomass energy, it will bring positive impacts on health and environment. How to let the household know this? If we use modern energy, our environment will improve, our life will improve.
Well, colleagues, let China have the last word in this discussion. I would like to thank you all for your active, engaging discussion with our panelists and our presenters. We had wonderful presentations. Your PowerPoints will be put up in the web if you allow, and that movie probably as well. So a round of applause to our